You ever have one of those moments when you're walking through a crowd, and everything just seems to fall into place? Or maybe, you're standing in the middle of a room, and something catches your eye, something you weren't expecting, but it feels oddly familiar, like a memory trying to reach out from the past. Well, that's exactly what happened to one young girl at a history fair. But what she saw wasn't just a display, no, it was something far darker, something that hit so close to home that she literally fainted in shock. Sounds like something straight out of a thriller, right? But what if I told you that the display she saw wasn't just a historical artifact, it was a chilling reminder of a real-life kidnap case that had been buried in the past, a case so haunting that it still haunted the minds of those who lived through it. Let me set the stage for you. Imagine this: you're at a typical history fair. The air is filled with the sounds of children chatting, teachers guiding their students from one display to the next, and the faint hum of history coming to life. Tables are scattered around, each one showcasing an era, an event, or a story from the past, nothing too unusual, right? That's what the girl thought too. She had no idea what she was about to stumble upon, and how it was going to change everything she thought she knew about the history she was learning. But then, as she moved from one table to the next, she was drawn to a particular display. It wasn't loud or showy like the others, but it had something about it that made her stop. Something about the image of a missing child in an old black and white photo, a hauntingly familiar face that felt like it belonged in a dream, not a history fair. It was the kind of face you would never forget. But how could she have known? The history fair was supposed to be a place of learning, of discovering how the past shaped the present. Yet, for this young girl, it became a place where the past came alive in a way she could never have imagined. The moment she locked eyes on the display, her heart started racing. Her breaths grew shallow. She felt like she couldn't escape, like the walls of the fair were closing in on her. It was as if the photo in front of her was calling her, begging her to uncover the truth behind the face. She didn't know it yet, but what she was about to uncover was nothing short of terrifying. Now, I know you're probably wondering what could possibly have caused her to faint. Was it just the eerie resemblance between the child in the photo and someone she knew? Or was there something more to it? Something much darker, much more twisted, that connected this missing child's story to a real-life kidnapping case that no one had spoken about for years. Trust me when I say that by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll be as hooked as she was, and you'll understand exactly why she fainted. But here's where it gets really interesting, because while this young girl was learning about history, she stumbled upon something that felt far too real. Something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world around her. What if the history she was learning wasn't just a collection of facts, but a web of stories and secrets, all connected in ways no one could have ever predicted? What if this missing child, this long-forgotten case, was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle that no one had ever dared to put together? I know, it sounds crazy. But by the end of this story, you'll see just how close these dots really are to connecting, and how this history fair display was just the tip of the iceberg. You'll uncover long-lost secrets that had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to take a closer look. And trust me, this young girl was about to take that look. But she wasn't the only one who would get caught up in this mystery. No, this would pull everyone around her into its dark, twisting path. The kind of path that leads you to places you never expected, to answers that will make you question the world you thought you knew. I know you're already hooked, how could you not be? The promise of uncovering a hidden mystery, a story from the past that's so close to the present, it could almost be happening right now. But here's the thing, the truth isn't as simple as it seems. What this girl discovered wasn't just about the history fair. It wasn't just about the picture or the story. It was about something much deeper. Something that goes beyond history, beyond time, and into the very fabric of reality itself. And trust me, when you discover the truth, it's going to shake you to your core. So, stick with me, because this story has twists you won't see coming. And by the end of it, you'll understand exactly why this girl fainted, and why what she uncovered is something you need to know. The answers are waiting, just a few minutes away. But be warned, once you start digging, there's no going back. Are you ready to uncover the truth? Stay tuned, because what comes next is the part that will make you wish you'd never looked away from that history fair display. The next part of the story is going to be the most shocking yet. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. Keep watching, because you won't believe what happens next. The girl who had fainted at the history fair was named Emily. She was a high school sophomore who had always been curious about the world around her, especially the dark corners of history that no one really wanted to talk about. It wasn't unusual for Emily to get lost in old newspapers, historical documentaries, or dusty archives in the back corners of the library. She'd always had this magnetic pull toward stories that no one seemed to remember, stories of unsolved crimes, mysterious disappearances, and tragic events that never made it into the official history books. It was the kind of thing that fascinated her, but also gave her a sense of unease. She'd grown up in a small suburban town, where most things were predictable, and the biggest news stories involved school sports or the occasional drama at the local diner. But for Emily, that world always felt too safe, too ordinary. She longed for something more exciting, something with a bit more edge to it. So when the opportunity arose for her to present a project at the school's annual history fair, she jumped at the chance to research something unconventional. While most of her classmates chose topics like the Civil War or the Founding Fathers, Emily wanted to dive into something that was, for lack of a better word, a little unsettling. She'd stumbled across an old, unmarked file in her school's library, a file that had clearly been forgotten by time. Inside were pages and pages of yellowed newspaper clippings and handwritten notes about a child's disappearance that had occurred decades ago. The case was never solved, and over the years, it had faded into nothing more than a footnote in the town's history. Emily had always been intrigued by cold cases, and this one felt like it had been calling her name. She decided to make it her project. What she didn't expect was how much the case would start to haunt her. As Emily dug deeper, she learned that the disappearance of little Sarah Jacobs had been the talk of the town in the 1980s. She had been just 6 years old when she vanished without a trace on a quiet summer afternoon. There were theories, of course. Some thought she'd been abducted by someone from out of town, others believed she had simply wandered off into the woods. But there were no answers, and over the years, Sarah's case had gone cold. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Something was off about the way people talked about it, or rather, how they didn't talk about it. The more she looked into it, the more the case seemed to be swept under the rug, like a dark secret everyone had agreed to forget. One evening, Emily sat at her desk, sifting through the last few pieces of evidence she had gathered. There was a photograph of Sarah, taken just before she disappeared. Emily stared at it for what felt like hours, mesmerized by the innocent smile frozen on Sarah's face. Then there was a strange coincidence that made Emily's stomach twist. In one of the articles, there was a mention of a local history fair, a fair that had taken place just days before Sarah vanished. The fair, according to the article, was a tradition in the town, something everyone attended. Emily thought it was a bizarre detail to include, but it stuck with her. Why mention the fair, of all things? It wasn't until she started piecing together the timeline that things began to feel wrong. Was there a connection between Sarah's disappearance and this history fair? Had something happened there? Emily couldn't stop herself from asking these questions, even if they seemed too outlandish to be true. The day of the history fair finally arrived. Emily's heart raced as she made her way to the venue. She hadn't told anyone about the strange feeling that had been creeping up on her, but she knew something was different now. The closer she got to her presentation table, the more unsettled she became. Was she about to uncover something that no one else wanted to know? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The display she had created was simple, just a board with photos, articles, and notes about Sarah's disappearance. She had even found some old interviews with locals who had been around at the time. But something about it didn't feel right. It was as if the past was staring back at her through that photo, daring her to keep digging. And then, she saw it. A photo that wasn't part of her research, a picture of the history fair from years ago. The image was grainy, but the faces in the crowd were clear. At first, Emily thought it was just an old photo from one of the fairs her school had held, but as her eyes scanned the faces, a chill ran down her spine. Among the crowd, she spotted a face she recognized, a man she had never seen before but whose face had been mentioned in the articles she'd read about Sarah's case. The man in the photo was someone who had been a prime suspect in Sarah's disappearance, but no one had ever been able to prove anything. His name had disappeared from the case file years ago, But here he was, smiling in the crowd of the history fair at the exact same time Sarah had gone missing. Emily's heart raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Was this just another coincidence, or was it possible that the man had been at the fair on the day Sarah vanished? She had to find out, and that meant digging deeper. But as Emily was about to move forward with her investigation, something strange happened. Her project was pulled from the fair. The school administration, claiming it wasn't appropriate, removed her display and told her to focus on something else. This wasn't just a setback, it was a warning. Someone didn't want her looking into this. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like there were people in the town who knew more than they were letting on. People who had been hiding the truth for years, and now, they were trying to stop her from uncovering it. And then there were the people around her, her friends, her teachers, even her family. Why was everyone so eager to sweep this under the rug? Why was everyone avoiding the subject of Sarah's disappearance, like it was a hot potato? Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were all hiding something. It was almost as if they were all connected in some way, all part of a bigger picture that she couldn't quite see yet. She began to suspect that the man in the photo wasn't the only one with secrets. There were whispers, little things she overheard in the hallways, offhand comments made by teachers, and odd glances exchanged between people who had no reason to be nervous. Could they all be involved? As Emily continued to piece together the clues, the walls around her seemed to grow closer. She was being watched, she could feel it. And the more she uncovered, the more it seemed like there were forces at play trying to keep her from finding the truth. Was she getting closer to something big? Or was she just digging herself into a hole she might never get out of? And then, just as she was starting to get closer to the answers she needed, she found another clue, one that made her blood run cold. A name, scribbled on the back of an old photograph. A name that, when she traced it back, led her to a chilling discovery. But just as she was about to make the connection, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. When she picked up, a voice on the other end whispered just one word: stop. Now, everything was spiraling out of control. And just when she thought she might have figured it all out, she realized that the story she was unraveling was far bigger and far darker than she could ever have imagined. Emily sat at her desk late that night, surrounded by pages of research, photographs, and notes, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything. The phone call had left her shaken, but it only pushed her further into the investigation. Whoever had called didn't want her digging into Sarah's case, but that only made her more determined to find the truth. She had to. The feeling that something was being covered up was too strong to ignore. She had spent the last few days chasing down every lead, connecting every dot, but now, it seemed like every step she took led to another obstacle, another layer of mystery that she wasn't prepared for. Just as she was starting to narrow down her focus, something happened that made her heart stop. One of the key pieces of evidence she had been counting on, an old journal entry that had mentioned a meeting between two important figures connected to the case, vanished. The small notebook, which had been tucked away in the library archives, was gone. Emily couldn't believe it at first. She checked the shelf, she checked every drawer, and even asked the librarian to search the storage room. It wasn't there. As much as she wanted to convince herself it was just a mistake, she knew deep down that it wasn't. Someone had taken it, and someone didn't want her to see what was inside. The journal had been her breakthrough, the piece that could have connected the dots between Sarah's disappearance and the mysterious man she had seen in that old photo. Without it, her entire theory was at risk of falling apart. Emily couldn't shake the growing sense of paranoia that had settled over her. It was as if she were being watched at every turn. Her phone buzzed incessantly, but whenever she picked it up, it was either an unrecognized number or an anonymous message. She couldn't tell who was trying to reach her or why they were so desperate to stop her from getting to the truth. It wasn't just the missing journal that worried her, things were starting to feel more dangerous, like people were actively trying to erase her research, to keep her in the dark. The more she dug, the more it seemed like there was someone or something actively erasing pieces of history, hiding them just out of reach. And then there was Adam. He had been her friend since middle school, always there to crack a joke when she was stressed or keep her company when she needed a break from her research. But lately, Adam had been acting strange. He had seemed distant, distracted, and whenever Emily brought up Sarah's case, he'd changed the subject almost immediately. She had always trusted him. He was one of the few people who had been genuinely supportive of her fascination with these dark historical mysteries. But now, she couldn't help but notice little things that didn't sit right. The way he seemed to know things he shouldn't, like when she mentioned her plan to meet with the local historian who had been a part of the search for Sarah all those years ago. How did he know that? The more Emily thought about it, the more it felt like Adam was somehow involved in the whole thing, as if he had a secret he wasn't telling her. Could he be one of the people who didn't want her digging into the past? It wasn't just a passing thought anymore. Emily had this nagging feeling in her gut that Adam knew more than he was letting on. The night before she was scheduled to meet the historian, Emily was at her house, organizing the mess of files and photos she had gathered. She was trying to put together a timeline, make sense of the connections she had found, when there was a knock at the door. It was Adam. His face looked pale, more serious than she had ever seen him. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tight with something she couldn't place. Emily, though suspicious, agreed. She led him inside, and they sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Look, I know you're close to figuring something out, but you need to stop," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some things are better left buried." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Emily stared at him, searching his face for any sign of sincerity, but all she could see was a nervousness she hadn't noticed before. "What are you talking about? What do you know about Sarah's case?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and fear. Adam looked away, unable to meet her eyes. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly torn, but then he finally spoke. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said, his voice barely audible now. "You're not just messing with a cold case. You're messing with people who have been protecting the truth for a reason. People who won't let you find out what really happened to Sarah." Emily's heart raced. "What are you saying?" she demanded, her pulse quickening. Adam swallowed hard, clearly fighting an inner battle. He hesitated before finally muttering, "Some things are better left forgotten. Trust me, you don't want to go down this road. It's not just history, Emily. It's a warning." The words sent a chill down her spine, and she watched as Adam stood up, ready to leave, his face clouded with a deep sense of dread. Before he could walk out, Emily grabbed his arm. "Wait, Adam. What do you know? What happened to Sarah?" she demanded, her grip tightening. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something, like the truth was just on the tip of his tongue. But instead, he pulled away from her, his eyes dark with something unspoken. "I can't help you," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm sorry." And just like that, he was gone. Emily sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the conversation. Had Adam been involved in the case all along? Was he trying to protect her from the truth, or was he simply trying to cover his own tracks? The questions swirled in her mind, but there was no time to figure them out now. She had a meeting with the historian the next morning, and she had to know what he could reveal before it was too late. She gathered her things, prepared to continue her search for answers, but the unease in her chest wouldn't subside. If Adam was warning her to stop, maybe she was getting too close. But the fear only made her more determined. As Emily prepared to leave her house the next morning, she made a final check of her notes. But something was wrong. The small notebook, the one she had used to track every lead, was missing. It was the last piece of her puzzle, and without it, everything she had worked for could fall apart. She searched frantically, retracing her steps, but it was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. Her mind raced as panic set in. Someone was trying to erase everything. And now, it was personal. But who was behind it? Was it Adam, the historian? Or was there someone else watching, waiting for her to make a mistake? With her heart pounding, Emily knew one thing for sure: someone didn't want the truth to come out. And no matter how many obstacles they threw in her way, she was more determined than ever to uncover it. But as she stepped out the door and into the unknown, she couldn't shake the feeling that the next person she trusted might not be as trustworthy as she thought. The twists and turns were only just beginning, and Emily had no idea how deep the rabbit hole really went. The disappearance of the journal, coupled with Adam's cryptic warning, set Emily on edge as she sat in her car, staring at the empty street ahead. The sense of impending danger hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, she realized just how much she was in over her head. The case she had thought was just an interesting historical mystery was now becoming something far more sinister. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Adam had looked at her before he left, as if there was something he knew, something he hadn't told her. But before she could fully process everything, a text message popped up on her phone. The name on the screen made her heart skip a beat. It was from her older brother, Jake. Jake was someone she trusted deeply, a rock in her life, especially since their parents had separated a few years ago. He had always been the one to listen to her when she needed someone to talk to, and they shared everything, from personal struggles to their shared love for old mysteries and conspiracy theories. She hadn't mentioned the disappearance of Sarah or the strange things happening around her to Jake, not yet, anyway. She had planned to bring it up, but now the message made her pause. It was short, but direct. Stop looking into Sarah's case. You don't know what you're dealing with. The message sent a cold shiver through Emily's spine. The words echoed in her mind, a warning that made her blood run cold. Her brother. Why would he tell her to stop? He was the one who had always encouraged her to follow her curiosity, to explore things others wouldn't dare to. Something was terribly wrong. The timing of it all felt too coincidental. It wasn't just Adam now. It was Jake, too. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized just how deep the deception ran. The past wasn't just hidden, it was being guarded, and someone wanted her to stop digging at all costs. Her fingers hovered over the screen, and for a moment, she debated whether she should reply. But before she could type anything, another message came in, this one from a different number. She didn't recognize the area code, but the message was unmistakable. You're getting too close, Emily. If you don't back off now, you'll regret it. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The fact that someone had her number and knew exactly what she was researching made her realize just how much danger she was in. Who were these people, and why were they so desperate to stop her? The question weighed on her mind as she glanced around, her eyes scanning the quiet street outside. But there was no one in sight. No one she could trust. Her thoughts were interrupted by the shrill sound of her phone ringing again, and when she answered, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but it carried a weight of authority. Emily, the voice said, low and controlled, you don't know who you're dealing with. You're poking around where you don't belong. This case isn't just a lost child, it's a closed chapter that was never meant to be opened. If you think you're uncovering the truth, you're wrong. You're only uncovering more lies. The voice paused, and then, with a chilling calmness, it added, you can walk away from this now, and we'll let you go. But if you continue, things will get worse for you and your family. The phone clicked off before Emily could respond. Her heart raced as she replayed the conversation in her mind. The voice didn't sound like anyone she recognized, but the threat was real. Someone was watching her. Someone who had access to her life, her family, and her every move. What struck her as even more unsettling was how everything seemed to be connected now. Adam, her brother, the mysterious phone calls, was this all a coincidence, or was she being deliberately pulled into something far bigger than she ever anticipated? The more she thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit together, and the more she realized that there were people in her life who might have been lying to her all along. She tried to reach out to Adam again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something, maybe he was involved in this somehow, and maybe Jake was too. Was she just paranoid, or was her brother, the person she had trusted more than anyone else, part of whatever web of secrets was being spun around her? What if they were hiding something dangerous, and they were doing everything they could to protect themselves? And if she kept pushing, would she end up the same way as Sarah? Would she vanish without a trace like so many before her? But it wasn't just the threats and the warnings that weighed on Emily. Something else had come to light that added another layer of complexity to her investigation. As she re-examined the articles and notes she had gathered, one document stood out to her in a way it hadn't before. It was a local police report from the night Sarah Jacobs disappeared. The report had been buried in the depths of an archive, overlooked by everyone who had ever looked into the case, and it detailed something strange, something that didn't quite fit with the rest of the evidence. It was a brief mention of a vehicle seen near Sarah's home the night she vanished, a car that had been parked on the street for hours, with no one in it. The report didn't go into detail, But it raised an unsettling question. If someone had been watching Sarah that night, who were they? Why was there no mention of this vehicle in the rest of the investigation? Emily remembered the photo she had seen at the history fair, the one with the man who had been a suspect. But what if there was someone else? Someone who had managed to slip under the radar all these years? Her mind was racing as she began to make new connections. The car, was it possible that it belonged to someone who was still living in the area? Maybe someone who knew too much, someone who had been involved in Sarah's disappearance, but had managed to stay hidden, unaccounted for. If Emily could track down that vehicle, she might find something no one else had discovered, something that could expose the truth about Sarah's kidnapping. But she knew that to find it, she had to go deeper, to push past the threats, past the people who were trying to keep her from learning the truth. But as the hours passed and Emily began to piece together more of the puzzle, the threats became more real, and the stakes higher. She was no longer just a teenager with a passion for history, she was someone who had stirred up a hornet's nest, and there was no telling how far the people protecting the secret would go to keep it that way. But the one thing that terrified Emily the most wasn't the calls or the warnings, it was the feeling that someone she trusted was playing her. If Adam or Jake were involved, how far would they go to stop her? The mystery had taken on a life of its own, and now, she had no choice but to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. But she was learning the hard way. Every answer she uncovered only led to more questions. And with every step she took, the danger got closer. Emily wasn't sure who she could trust anymore, but one thing was certain, she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. She had to know what happened to Sarah Jacobs, even if it meant losing everything in the process. It had been days since Emily received the cryptic messages, since the phone calls that warned her to stop her investigation. Her every waking moment had been consumed with the case, every lead, every clue, every thread she could follow. But with each new discovery, the tension in her chest grew tighter, as if she were walking a fine line between uncovering the truth and falling into a trap. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The feeling that she was being watched, that someone was always one step behind her, was overwhelming. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something was happening. Something dangerous. And it was closing in on her. That evening, after another long day of research and dead ends, Emily decided to take a walk to clear her mind. She had tried reaching out to Adam again, but his phone had gone straight to voicemail, no response. Jake, too, had grown distant, his messages curt and non-committal. It felt like everyone she trusted was pulling away, or worse, hiding something. The quiet streets outside her house were empty, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. As she walked, her thoughts were muddled with the strange pieces of the puzzle she had gathered. She couldn't shake the image of the car from the police report, the mysterious figure that had lingered near Sarah's house the night of her disappearance. She had to know more. She needed to find out who that person was, who had been watching, waiting. But the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it felt. It wasn't until she turned the corner onto the side street that the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The feeling was unmistakable, someone was behind her. She quickened her pace, trying to shake the sensation, but it only intensified. Her mind raced with the possibilities. Was it one of the people who had been following her since the beginning? Was Adam behind her, trying to warn her again? But when she glanced over her shoulder, there was no one in sight. The street was empty, just like before. Yet, the unease settled deeper into her chest, an unshakable sense that something was wrong. She turned another corner, heading toward her house, but the feeling didn't subside. It was as if she were walking into a trap. As she neared the front door, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled it out, hoping it was one of the familiar names. Instead, it was an anonymous text message. "We see you. Don't think you're safe." A cold shiver ran down her spine, and her breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen, staring at the screen, the weight of the words sinking in. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat, a direct message from someone who knew exactly where she was. She glanced around, her heart pounding in her ears, but the street was still eerily quiet. No one. The world felt suddenly too big, too open, like she was completely exposed, and the thought of going inside seemed just as dangerous as staying out here. The door to her house was locked, but the feeling of being trapped crept up her spine as she fumbled with her keys. The quietness of the neighborhood now felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. She had been so focused on the investigation, on the mystery of Sarah's disappearance, but now, it was no longer just about uncovering secrets. It was about survival. The weight of the danger that had been hanging over her head for days, the pressure she had been ignoring, suddenly became too real to ignore. Once inside, she locked the door behind her, bolting it with shaky hands, but even that didn't ease the gnawing fear in her stomach. She tried to steady her breathing, to calm herself, but it was useless. Her mind was spinning, thoughts racing faster than she could keep up with. She pulled out her phone again, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but there was nothing. No new messages. No calls from Adam, no word from Jake. The silence felt suffocating. She needed to talk to someone. She needed answers. But she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone she trusted, everyone who had been in her life for so long, was involved in something dark, something sinister that she didn't yet understand. Was Adam really trying to warn her? Or was he part of whatever was happening? Was Jake involved in this too? The question lingered in her mind, unanswered, as she collapsed onto the couch. She couldn't stop thinking about the threats, the strange disappearances, and the people who had vanished without a trace. Sarah's case was no longer just about the past, it was about her now. It had pulled her into something much larger, and she had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the number on the screen was familiar. It was Jake. Her brother's name was like a lifeline, a connection to the normal life she still clung to. She picked up immediately, almost desperate to hear his voice. But when she answered, her heart sank. The line was silent at first, and then she heard the faintest sound, as if someone was breathing on the other end. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling. But before she could say anything more, the line went dead. She stared at the screen, the phone in her hand now feeling like a weight. Why had he called? Why had he not said anything? 1,000 questions surged in her mind, but the one thing that terrified her more than anything else was the thought that something had happened to him. The same sense of dread that had plagued her since the beginning of this investigation was growing stronger, pressing in on her from all sides. It wasn't just the missing journal anymore. It wasn't just the strange phone calls. Something had shifted. It felt like she was being pulled into a vortex, a dangerous game with rules she couldn't understand. With trembling hands, she searched through her contacts and tried calling Jake again. But this time, the phone just rang, and then went straight to voicemail. Her chest tightened as a sinking feeling settled in. She couldn't shake the thought that her brother, the person she had trusted most, was in trouble. Had someone taken him? Was he being kept silent, just like everyone else who knew too much? The questions flooded her mind, but the truth was she had no answers. And then, without warning, there was a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost tentative, but it made her blood run cold. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Her heart thudded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Who would be knocking at her door at this time of night, especially after everything that had already transpired? Was it someone she knew? Someone she trusted? Or was it another warning? Emily slowly stood, her legs unsteady as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She had to know what was happening. She had to find the truth. But with every new threat, every new mystery, the walls around her grew tighter, the danger more palpable. The answers she sought now felt farther out of reach than ever before. And the closer she got to the truth, the more she realized, some things, once uncovered, can never be unseen. And now, she had no choice but to face whatever was lurking in the shadows. As Emily stood frozen by the door, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her. The knock had stopped, but the silence that followed felt almost louder than the sound itself. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and for a brief moment, she considered not opening the door at all, just staying hidden in her house, away from the chaos that had taken over her life. But the truth was, she couldn't keep running. Not anymore. She needed answers. Slowly, she made her way toward the door, every step feeling like it was pulling her deeper into a web she couldn't escape. When she reached for the doorknob, her phone buzzed again, and for the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was Adam. Maybe it was Jake. She grabbed the phone from the counter, hoping for a sign, any sign that things might return to some semblance of normalcy. But the name on the screen made her blood run cold, Detective Simon Wells. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered the call, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rising panic inside her. "Detective Wells?" she asked, her throat dry. "Emily," the voice on the other end was clipped, urgent. "I need you to listen very carefully. I don't know how you've gotten involved in all of this, but you're in over your head. You need to stay away from the case. Now." The detective's tone was sharp, but it was the quiet desperation underneath that caught Emily off guard. She had met him once at the history fair, where he had asked a few casual questions about Sarah's case. At the time, he seemed like just another officer doing his job, trying to keep the peace. But now, something in his voice sounded different, almost like a man who had realized too late that he had been caught in something he couldn't control. Emily's pulse raced. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" "I'm just trying to figure out what happened to Sarah," she said, her grip tightening on the phone. "What's going on? Why do you sound like this?" "Because you're looking in the wrong place," he replied, his voice lowering. "And the people you think you can trust, they're not who you think they are." Emily's mind reeled. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and for the first time since all of this began, she felt the weight of the mystery. She had been chasing crashing down on her. What was Wells talking about? Who was she supposed to trust? Adam? Jake? The pieces of the puzzle she had worked so hard to put together suddenly felt like they were slipping through her fingers, and in their place, a new, terrifying truth began to form in her mind. She wasn't just investigating a kidnapping. She was being played. And worse, she was being manipulated into uncovering a past that was better left forgotten. "Detective, I don't understand, what aren't you telling me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The detective paused, and for a moment, Emily thought he wasn't going to answer. But then, he spoke again, this time with an eerie calmness. "I'll tell you everything. But not over the phone. Not here. Meet me at the old bridge. Near the edge of town. Come alone. And if anyone else knows what you're doing, if you tell anyone, I'll make sure this is the last conversation we ever have." The line clicked, and Emily was left standing there, staring at the screen in disbelief. Her heart was pounding in her chest, the blood rushing in her ears. She had been so sure of her direction, so convinced she was close to the truth. But now, everything had changed. The detective, the person who should have been helping her, he was warning her, and he sounded like he was trying to protect her from something. But protect her from what? And why the sudden urgency to meet at the old bridge, a place that had long been abandoned, shrouded in rumors of strange happenings? Emily felt the weight of his words like a lead weight in her stomach. The detective's warning wasn't just about the case anymore, it was about her. She had crossed some line, some threshold, and now there were forces at play that she couldn't fully comprehend. She needed to meet him. There was no other choice. But she had to be careful. If Detective Wells was involved in something he was too afraid to talk about, then what had she gotten herself into? With shaky hands, Emily pocketed her phone and moved toward the door. But as she reached for the handle again, she hesitated. The knock had come from the front door, but there was no sign of anyone outside when she looked through the peephole. It was as if the person who had knocked had disappeared into thin air. Could they be watching her from somewhere? Was this all part of the plan? The familiar weight of fear settled in her chest once more as she stepped out into the night, her breath visible in the cold air. The shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if something was lurking just out of view. As she walked toward her car, her mind raced through the implications of what Wells had said. The people you think you can trust. Was Adam one of those people? Was Jake? They had been there for her throughout everything, but now it felt like everyone she trusted was caught up in a much darker game than she had realized. When she reached her car and sat behind the wheel, her hands still trembling, a new thought hit her with the force of a tidal wave. What if it wasn't just Sarah's case she was meant to solve? What if the key to the mystery was connected to someone in her life, someone she had never suspected? As Emily drove through the quiet streets toward the bridge, the darkness pressing in from all sides, one thought consumed her. What if the answer she was looking for was hidden right in front of her? What if everything she had been told, everything she had uncovered, was just a diversion, a distraction to keep her from the real truth? She had been so focused on Sarah's disappearance, on the past, but what if the true mystery was much closer to home? When she reached the old bridge, the headlights of her car illuminated the darkened structure, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. Her heart was in her throat as she parked the car and stepped out, the cold night air biting at her skin. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she thought she knew was about to be turned upside down. With every step she took toward the bridge, the weight of the unknown pressed down harder. The truth was out there, somewhere, waiting to be discovered, but at what cost? As she reached the center of the bridge, she heard a soft creak behind her. Someone was there. And when she turned, she saw the figure emerge from the shadows, the last person she ever expected to see. The figure in the shadows took a step forward, and Emily's breath hitched in her throat. At first, she didn't recognize him, the silhouette barely visible under the dim moonlight, but as he stepped closer, her heart dropped into her stomach. It was Adam. But the Adam standing before her was not the same man who had promised to help her, to fight by her side. His eyes were cold, distant, his face set in an expression that was nothing like the warmth she remembered. The man she had trusted was a stranger now, and in that moment, every warning she had ignored flooded her mind. "Adam," she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. "What's going on? What are you doing here?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze flickered toward her car, then back at her, his jaw tightening. Emily felt a wave of nausea sweep over her. The air between them had grown thick, charged with something far darker than just secrets. He wasn't just here to help her, he was here to silence her. "I didn't want it to go this far, Emily," he said, his voice low and controlled, but the edge was unmistakable. "You should have stayed out of this. You should have walked away when you had the chance." Her mind was spinning. Every part of her wanted to run, but her feet felt frozen to the concrete, as if the very ground was holding her in place, making her face this ugly truth. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising in panic. "What are you involved in? Why are you doing this?" For a moment, Adam looked almost apologetic, his eyes briefly softening as if he regretted the pain he had caused her. But then, just as quickly, the mask fell again, and the coldness returned. "It's bigger than you think," he said, stepping closer, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Much bigger. And you're in way over your head." Emily shook her head, her thoughts scrambling for clarity. What had she uncovered? What had she stumbled upon that was so dangerous? And why did Adam seem to be involved in all of it? She couldn't process the magnitude of what he was saying. The case, the disappearances, the strange coincidences, they were all tied together, connected in ways she hadn't seen. And now, with Adam standing before her, a person she trusted completely, the truth she had been chasing was slipping farther from her grasp, twisted and distorted by lies. Before she could speak, a car's headlights illuminated the bridge, casting long shadows over them both. Emily turned instinctively, fear spiking in her chest, and saw two men step out of the car. They were tall, dressed in dark coats, and moved with an eerie precision, as if they were part of something far more organized than a simple conspiracy. One of them smiled as he approached. "Adam, I told you not to let her get too close," the man said, his voice smooth and calm, but there was an underlying threat in every word. "She's more stubborn than I expected," Adam replied curtly, his gaze never leaving Emily. The second man, who had been standing behind the first, stepped forward now. His face was hard, unrecognizable, like someone who had seen too much and cared for nothing. Emily felt a cold, sinking sensation in her stomach. There was something deeply wrong about this whole situation, and she could feel her window of safety closing fast. This wasn't just a few rogue individuals. This was something much bigger. It was organized, calculated, and Emily was now in the middle of it. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, Emily," the man said, his voice almost too calm. "But don't worry, we'll help you forget it all. A fresh start. No more questions. You can walk away from this. It's the only way you'll survive." The words hung in the air, and Emily's heart raced. "Survive? What do you mean?" Her voice cracked. She couldn't breathe. The world was spinning, and she felt like she was drowning in it. How deep did this go? Who were these people? And what was their connection to Sarah's disappearance? To the other missing children? What kind of conspiracy was she really up against? Adam took a step back, his face a mask of resignation. I tried, Emily. I really did. But you're not going to walk away from this. Not anymore. Suddenly, everything hit her at once. The pieces, the scattered fragments she had been piecing together for weeks, finally came together in one crushing moment of realization. The history fair. The way the people involved had seemed too calm, too well organized. The constant feeling that someone was watching her. The missing journals, the strange phone calls, the cryptic messages. She hadn't just stumbled into an isolated mystery. She had uncovered a massive network. You did this. You're all a part of this, she whispered, the shock making her voice falter. It's not just Sarah. It's everything, all of it. The disappearances, the cover-ups, the manipulation. You've been playing me from the beginning, haven't you? Adam didn't answer, but the look in his eyes was all the confirmation she needed. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. She had trusted him. She had confided in him. And now, she realized that she wasn't just being kept in the dark, she had been kept there on purpose. One of the men stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket. It was a small black folder. You've been asking the right questions, Emily. Too many. But now, you'll get the answer you were looking for, he said, flipping it open. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It was a file, a list of names. The names of people who had vanished. Children. And in the middle of it, right next to Sarah's name, was another one. Jake Adams. Her world stopped spinning. Her body felt numb as the realization set in. No, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Jake. Jake is a part of this too. Adam didn't even flinch, his expression unchanged as he looked at her with cold, regretful eyes. You should have stayed away from this, Emily. But now you know too much, and it's already too late for you. Everything fell into place with devastating clarity. The phone calls, the strange behavior, the reasons why Adam had pulled away. He wasn't just warning her. He had been part of the plan from the beginning. And Jake, her brother, the one person she thought she could count on, had been in on it too. This was no longer just about Sarah's disappearance. It was about a network of people, a conspiracy that ran so deep, so far-reaching, that she could no longer tell who was working against her and who was working for them. You can't run from this anymore, the second man said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. There's nowhere left for you to hide. The walls were closing in fast. There was no way out, no escape. Emily had been drawn into a web so tangled that every direction she turned only seemed to lead her further into danger. And with Jake's name on the file, she realized that even the people she loved most had been swallowed by this monstrous conspiracy. The truth was uglier than anything she could have imagined, and now, it was too late to turn back. The cold breeze whipped through the night, and Emily knew, in the deepest part of her gut, that she was standing at the edge of something far worse than she ever thought possible. The question wasn't whether she could survive. It was whether anyone could. The world around Emily felt like it was folding in on itself, each breath harder to take, each step heavier than the last. The revelation about Jake, her brother, being just as tangled in the web as Adam hit her like a tidal wave, pulling her under before she could even understand the full scope of the chaos she was in. She was suffocating, drowning in the realization that everyone she had trusted had been lying to her. Every single person. And now, as the shadows of the bridge stretched long beneath her, she could feel the game was reaching its final, brutal stage. The two men flanking Adam took a slow step toward her, their faces unreadable, but their eyes cold with purpose. Emily's heart raced as the man with the black folder pushed it into her hands. She opened it, her hands shaking, her mind numb with disbelief. But there it was again. Another name. Her own name, neatly typed at the bottom of the list. Her blood ran cold as the weight of that final revelation crashed over her. They had been watching her from the start, pulling the strings, guiding her every move, every question. The pieces of the puzzle that had never quite fit, the little inconsistencies, the whispers she had overheard, they were all part of a plan she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Why, she managed to choke out, her voice barely audible, strangled by the sudden, suffocating fear. Why do this? What do you want from me? Adam's face twisted, and for the first time since they had met, there was a flicker of emotion, guilt, regret. It was fleeting, barely perceptible, but it was enough to give her a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely lost. But then, just as quickly, that moment of softness disappeared, replaced by something far darker. Something far colder. It was never about you, Emily, Adam said, his voice low and final. It was always about what you could uncover. The truth you could bring to light. And now, we can't let you go back. Not after everything you've seen. She tried to back away, her heart thumping painfully in her chest. No. This couldn't be happening. They had to be lying. They had to be manipulating her into thinking she was a part of something she wasn't. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a much larger, far-reaching conspiracy, one that she had unknowingly walked into. The kidnappings, the disappearances, the twisted network of people pulling the strings, all of it connected to something much bigger. And the more she dug, the more dangerous it became. Before she could make another move, Adam stepped forward, blocking her path. His eyes, once filled with affection, were now filled with a chilling emptiness. I didn't want to be the one to do this to you, Emily, he said, his voice quieter now, almost sad. But you're too close. You know too much. You have to understand, sometimes, people like us, we have to make hard choices. And you're not the first person we've had to eliminate. Her stomach turned, bile rising in her throat. The darkness of his words hung in the air, suffocating her with their finality. She wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but her body wouldn't move. The reality of it was too overwhelming, too much to process in that single, horrible moment. She felt trapped, backed into a corner with nowhere left to go. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the night. The sound of something heavy hitting the ground sent a shock through her, and Emily spun around, heart pounding in her chest, to see a figure emerging from the shadows. A familiar figure. Jake. He stood there, breathless, eyes wild with something she couldn't quite identify, fear, urgency, or perhaps the same kind of resignation she saw in Adam's face. But something was wrong. His clothes were torn, his hands smeared with dirt and blood. He had been in a fight. Jake. Emily breathed, relief and confusion flooding her at once. Jake, what's going on? What are you doing here? Jake's gaze flickered from Adam to the men standing beside him, his eyes narrowing with a strange, almost defeated look. I was hoping I could stop this, he said, his voice shaky. But I couldn't. They're too powerful, Em. You don't understand. This is bigger than us. He turned to face her, his expression softening. I didn't want you involved. I never wanted you to find out. You've been working with them? The question tore out of Emily's throat before she could stop it. It felt like an accusation, but more than that, it was the culmination of every shattered piece of trust she had left. Jake had always been her rock, her brother, the one person she thought was untouchable. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, part of this twisted web. Jake swallowed hard, his fists clenched at his sides. I didn't have a choice, Em. None of us did. He broke off, the words catching in his throat, and Emily could see it now, the hollow look in his eyes, the defeat that wasn't just from physical exhaustion but from something much deeper. Something irreversible. Emily took a step back, her mind spinning. This isn't you, Jake. I know it's not. Please tell me you haven't been working with them this whole time. Please. Before Jake could respond, the first of the two men stepped forward, a cruel smile on his lips. It doesn't matter now, Emily. You've crossed a line you can't uncross. You've seen too much. And now, there's no turning back. The pieces are in motion, and we can't afford to have you disrupt the plan. It was then that Emily realized, with a sickening jolt, what they were referring to. This wasn't just about her family. It wasn't just about Sarah. The plan they were speaking of this was about something far more sinister. Something that would affect everyone. No. It couldn't be. She was just one person. But as the realization set in, she understood just how deep this went. It wasn't just about the kidnapping ring. It was about something so much darker, so much larger. Get away from her, Jake shouted, his voice suddenly louder, desperate. Emily, run. Please. Just go. But it was too late. Adam and the men were already moving toward her, closing the distance between them with terrifying precision. Emily's heart raced as she turned, looking for an escape, a way out, but there was nowhere to run. The truth crashed down on her with such force that it almost knocked the breath out of her. There was no saving her. There was no way out. Not now. And just as the first man reached for her, there was a flash of light. A gunshot rang out. Emily's blood ran cold as the man stumbled, a startled gasp escaping him. The second man fell to the ground next, his body convulsing as Jake's figure emerged from the shadows, now holding a gun. It was Jake who had fired, Jake who had come to save her, but at what cost? Run, Emily. Get out of here. Jake shouted, his face pale, his hands shaking as he dropped the gun. But Emily couldn't move. She couldn't process what had just happened. Her mind was still reeling, unable to make sense of it all. The truth, the lies, the betrayals, everything had shattered in an instant. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. Jake had just saved her. But as the first man bled out on the cold ground, and the second man lay motionless at her feet, Emily knew that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because deep in the darkness, another shadow was already stirring. The morning after felt like stepping into a world that had been permanently altered. Emily stood at the edge of the bridge, now eerily silent except for the low hum of wind rolling across the cracked pavement. The remnants of the night before were already being swallowed by daylight, the blood long dried into the concrete, the bodies removed under the cover of sirens and sealed statements. It was over, at least, that's what the local authorities told her. But Emily knew better. The truth wasn't so clean. It didn't end with gunfire or a single confrontation in the dark. It lingered. It stayed rooted in the hollow spaces of her chest, where fear and betrayal had carved themselves in permanent ink. Jake had been taken into protective custody, his cooperation earning him immunity from prosecution, but their relationship, like so many other things, had become something unrecognizable, something marked by silence, apologies left unspoken, and an unbridgeable gap that had once been filled with trust. The files, the names, the pattern, they had all been real. The conspiracy had spread like a cancer beneath their town, beneath so many towns just like it, operating under the illusion of safety and community. The history fair had merely been a cover, an opportunity to test the boundaries of exposure, to see how far they could push the truth before someone pulled back the curtain. Emily had been that someone, and now she had the burden of knowing just how deep it all went. The organization wasn't just local, it had federal roots, threads that reached into every level of power. Some of the names in those documents were still out there, protected by money, influence, and layers of manufactured legitimacy. What they had stopped at the bridge was only a piece, a splinter of the machine. Weeks passed, but Emily couldn't go back to who she had been. She quit her job at the school, stopped taking calls from people she used to call friends. There was too much noise now, too many people trying to spin her story into something convenient, something profitable. Reporters flooded her inbox. Podcasts offered her money. True crime YouTube channels started using her name in clickbait titles. Girl uncovers real-life kidnapping ring at history fair. The headlines were endless, sensationalized, hollow. None of them captured what it had cost her. No one talked about the cold, empty nights, the loss of her innocence, the way her brother had shattered under the weight of his own choices. No one asked about the dreams that haunted her, the voice she heard in her sleep, Sarah's voice, asking if she had finally been found. But Emily didn't speak to the press. She kept the journal, Sarah's journal, hidden in the floorboards beneath her bedroom. She read it sometimes, when the world became too loud or too quiet, and every time, she saw the same message between the lines. Sarah had never stopped fighting, even when no one believed her. Even when her story had been buried beneath shame and whispers. That spirit, that resilience, it stayed with Emily. It reminded her why she had started digging in the first place. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and cast the sky in shades of gold and violet, Emily found herself back at the fairgrounds. The booths had long since been dismantled, the laughter replaced by silence. But standing there, at the very spot where Sarah's display had once stood, Emily felt something shift inside her. A fragile kind of peace, perhaps not the kind that comes from happy endings, but the kind that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. She whispered a quiet goodbye to Sarah, hoping that somehow, wherever she was, the truth had reached her. Still, there were questions left unanswered. The man who had orchestrated it all, his name had never been found in the documents. The deeper players, the ones pulling strings from behind mirrored glass and conference room doors, they had vanished, protected by layers of plausible deniability and fear. And Jake, though safe now, had withdrawn completely. Emily hadn't seen him since the final investigation wrapped up. His silence said everything. He had done what he had to do to save her, but some sins couldn't be undone. And yet, even as the world tried to move on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. Sometimes, when she drove home late or opened her laptop, she'd notice little things: a shadow lingering too long in her rearview mirror, a file that wouldn't open, an email that disappeared before she could read it. She told herself it was just paranoia, trauma clinging to her like smoke. But in her gut, she knew the story wasn't finished. Maybe it never would be. Back home, Emily pinned a single piece of paper to her wall. It was a photocopy of a list she had found in the folder that night. The original had been taken by the authorities, sealed away somewhere she'd never access again. At the bottom, beneath the name Emily Hart, was one final name, one that hadn't been mentioned once during the investigation, one that still made her stomach drop every time she read it. Next of kin, unconfirmed. It wasn't over. It had never just been about Sarah or Jake or even Emily herself. There was someone else, someone watching, waiting, maybe even orchestrating what came next. The story hadn't ended. It had only opened another door. And as she stared at that name, unconfirmed, unexplained, Emily realized she wasn't just the survivor of a tragedy. She was the beginning of something much bigger. Something darker. And one day, that story would demand to be told. Until then, she would wait. Because the truth always finds its way to the surface.